Good evening and a very warm welcome to the Black Hole. Well, once celebrated for its ideals of progress, culture, and democracy, the West today finds itself mired in a civilizational crisis. As societies deal with growing disillusionment, we witness the troubling resurgence of a fascist mindset marked by the politics of lies, contempt for culture and education, and the scapegoating of foreigners. And hence, we are gathered here to discuss one of the defining questions of our time: what went wrong with the West? And for that, we are very grateful. We are very honored to have Rob Riemen with us, who is sitting on my right, one of Europe's foremost public intellectuals and the founder president of the Nexus Institute, renowned for his advocacy of humanist values and critical public discourse. Moreover, Rob Riemen is also the author of several widely translated books, including Nobility of Spirit, To Fight Against This Age, and Becoming Human is an Art, which offer powerful meditations on humanism, democracy, and resistance to totalitarianism. And I would like to add that his upcoming book, titled The Word That Conquers Death, Stories About True Greatness, is due in fall 2025. On my left sits Dr. Pervez Hood, who will moderate today's session. आप सब लोगों की आमद का भी शुक्रिया. Please do us a favor and turn your cell phones to silent mode so that there is no distraction. जैसा कि यहाँ की रवायत है कि गुफ्तगू के बाद, बामी गुफ्तगू के बाद हाउस ओपन होता है for Q&A. And when the house is open for Q&A, just raise your hand first so that this microphone is given to you. इसके बिना आपकी आवाज़ ऑनलाइन ऑडियंस तक नहीं जाएगी, तो प्लीज़ इस चीज़ का ख्याल रखिएगा. And that's it. Now please welcome Dr. Pervez Hood and our guest speaker, Rob Riemen.
Well, I'm familiar enough over here, but today we have Rob Riemen, and it's really an honor to have him here. He's the president of the Nexus Institute. He founded it, actually, and he is one of Europe's foremost intellectuals. Now, it's remarkable what is happening in the West today, and there's even the question of whether there is some unified whole called the West, an issue that we might discuss a little bit later. But who would have thought that after the Reformation, which was the decisive defeat of the Christian Church, and then following that is the Enlightenment. Enlightenment is probably the most intellectually vigorous period of human history, which gave birth to democracy, to ideas of human freedom, to ideas that humans have agency enough to understand the world, from the very smallest to the ultimate size, that is the universe. The political philosophies that were spawned by the Enlightenment then led eventually to a democratic Europe, one where human equality, human dignity was assumed, was automatic. But then, in the 1930s, there emerged a movement over there, the fascist movement, both in Italy, but more so in Germany, and that led Europe and the world into the greatest horror that the world has yet seen. That was the Second World War. Well, then came a period of peace, sanity. Yes, there was the Cold War, but the rules were respected in Europe at least. And nobody thought that Europe and the West could be going on the path towards fascism again. But then there were people who knew that society well enough and could see far enough, and amongst them was Rob. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Rob. You can take as long as you like, but you said 40 minutes? Okay. And then we shall have a short conversation amongst ourselves and then open up to the audience. So it's all yours.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you very much for being here, having me here. It's the first visit my beloved wife Evelyn and I are paying to Islamabad. We told already many people here how easy it was to get here, to get the visa, to go through the customs, no problems whatsoever. We travel all over the world, we have different experiences. So far, Pakistan has been very welcoming, and it's a great pleasure to be at this very special place, the Black Hole. So what brought us here? Well, what brought us here was an invitation we have sent to Professor Hoodboy to participate in our Nexus conference, which we'll have in November 22, and you can follow it online if you wish. And the title of the conference is Apocalypse Now, the Revelation of Our Time. Now, of course, the title refers to this final book in the Bible, where you have this mythological story about 4 horsemen who are conquering the world and bringing death and war and hunger. Anyway, all the apocalyptic phenomenon, all its destructive work. Well, I don't say anything new to anybody if I refer to the fact that those 4 horsemen are still running all over the world, right? We still have many conflicts. We still have cold wars, proxy wars, hot wars in Gaza, in Ukraine, in Sudan, and all the horror which they are bringing and which we can watch through television or whatever anytime. There is climate change with its fires, its floods, its droughts, creating the wasteland. And all these catastrophes leads to the fact that many millions of people are dead, wounded, living in extreme poverty, or become refugees and are nowhere welcome. Definitely not in Europe, I can tell you, and also not in the United States. But the title of the conference also refers to a movie you may have seen by Francis Ford Coppola in 1979. Apocalypse Now. And it's a movie from 1979, and although the story is the story based on the novel of Joseph Conrad, Into the Heart of Darkness, it's in the setting of the Vietnam War, and it's about an American colonel, Colonel Coots, brilliantly played by Marlon Brando, who also figures in The Godfather, and who has to be terminated. Well, terminated is a military jargon for to be killed. Why? He has to be killed, according to his superiors, because Colonel Kurtz has gone insane. He no longer obeys his commanders, and he became a dangerous man with his threat, Apocalypse Now, drop the bomb. That's also what you can see when in the movie they come to their compound. Apocalypse Now, drop the bomb. Well, Captain Willard, played by Martin Sheen, is given the mission to terminate Colonel Kurtz. And on his journey through the jungle of Vietnam and Cambodia, going to the heart of darkness, the director of the movie, Francis Ford Coppola, wants his audience to see that the real heart of darkness is that our supposed Western civilization is itself hollow. It's deprived of any moral and spiritual values, and that we are living in a new age of barbarism, with as its ultimate sign the threat of a nuclear war. Now, so that was the message in 1979, and at that time I was 70 years old. 10 years later, we had the fall of the Berlin Wall, and Frank Fukuyama came for us in the West with the hopeful message, this is the end of history, because as of now, the whole world will copy our model of a liberal democracy, capitalist system, and will make everybody rich and happy and free and wonderful. That's the end of history. Now, almost 4 decades later, we know that the thesis of the end of history was a very dangerous illusion. Dangerous because, again, with it, and I keep talking about what happened in the West we forgot this lesson of the Roman philosopher Cicero, who for 2,000 years earlier, around the time that John wrote this book on the Revelation and the Apocalypse, he taught us, history is the teacher of life. At the very moment you forget history, you forget everything. It's imperative to know history. But why should you learn history when you are living at the end of history, right? At the end of history, history is over. So, why waste your time on history? Well, with the new imperialism, now coming from America, from Russia, from China, plus the threat of a nuclear war, which has become in the West now more a threat because of the threats made by Putin, the nuclear war is no longer a forgotten phenomenon. And as Professor Hoodboy is a world-renowned nuclear scientist, it was absolutely obvious that we wanted him also to participate in our Nexus conference. And the Nexus conference, if you go on YouTube or whatever, are kind of intellectual operas, right? It's not the academic stuff. It's a kind of intellectual opera where 8 people around a coffee table on the setting of the National Opera will have a very lively and in-depth discussion. And we are very happy that he accepted. And that was the reason for us to come and meet him in person. In return, he kindly invited me to give a talk. And so tonight I would like to share with you some notes in what my view has gone wrong with the West in general in the last 4 decades. So the first thing is already obvious. One of the things that went wrong with the West is we forgot the lessons of history. We had too much faith in this idea that we live at the end of history. So why should we study history? That we ignored climate change, although the report of the Club of Rome, which was issued in the beginning of the 70s, telling the whole world, look, if you continue on this path of economic growth, you will blow up the whole earth and you will destroy everything. It was forgotten. We also ignored willingly the threat of a nuclear war and what its consequences will be. That also is part of the collective amnesia which took hold on the West. But probably the most fundamental thing we forgot is a lesson, is a warning which was already given to us in the West in 1919. So in April 1919, a journal in London, the Athenaeum, published a letter by the French poet, philosopher Paul Valéry. And starting with the now famous phrase, we later civilizations, we too now know that we are mortal. Civilizations are mortal. And he continues his letter by noting that, of course, prior to 1914, people realized that earlier civilizations like that of Babylon had finished, together with their gods and their laws, academy, science, and great classics. But all of this, according to the general sentiment, was not of our affair. But now, after this World War from 1914 to 1918, Valéry can only conclude, I quote, our generation learned from its own experience how the most beautiful things and the most ancient and the most formidable and the best can perish by an accident. So his inescapable question is there hope after the end of this global war for a new and better world? But in a pessimistic tone, the writer sketches the intellectual debris of that mountain of painful facts on which we can no longer rely. He writes, the military crisis may be over, the economic crisis still with us in all its force, but the intellectual crisis, being more subtle because it assumes the most deceptive appearances, will hardly allow us to grasp its true existence. And he continues, the illusion of a European culture has been lost, and knowledge has been proved impotent to save anything, whatever. Science is mortally wounded in its moral ambitions and, as it were, put to shame by the cruelty of its applications. The guessing, all these things. Idealism is barely surviving, and it's called now for account for its dreams. Realism is hopeless. Anyway. We are no longer the master of the motions of our own fault. And so then he continues with his deepest concern, however, is that he knows that the decline of his civilization is rooted in, quote unquote, the crisis of the mind. And only once this crisis has been overcome will a view towards a new civilization become possible. Now, the perspectives of a new civilization seems to me more far away than ever. Yes, I do know that Silicon Valley, with its technological promises as a new civilization based on artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence, transhumanism, and even, according to Mr. Musk, a new civilization on planet Mars. But whenever this might become reality, it will be by definition a post-human civilization. And a post-human civilization, if it's not a contradiction in terms, for me it's the most depressing dystopia I can imagine. The perspective of a new civilization remains also far away, as the West is concerned, as it is still in the midst of a crisis of the mind. And this crisis of the mind is, according to me, at the core of what went wrong with the West. And that crisis of the mind has its political and societal expression in the return of fascism all over the West. So when I first made this statement in 2010, 15 years ago, in an essay I published, The Eternal Return of Fascism, which I then published. Of course, I published it first in my own country, and the general response was complete denial, which was not that unexpected because nobody likes inconvenient truths, right? You don't like to deal with an inconvenient truth in your personal life, also not in the world in which you are living. I got the same response when the book was published in 2018 in America by W.W. Norton. The New York Times at that time asked me to write an op-ed because of the book, entitled To Fight Against This Age on Fascism and Humanism. So I wrote an op-ed, and in very objective terms, I said, well, you know, these are the primary colors of Mr. Trump. And they refused to publish it. No, you have to write something different. Okay, I'll write something different. Look, English is not my native tongue. Maybe I did something wrong. I'll try it again. I'll do my best. Again, I wrote an op-ed, but with the same argument. Look, these are the primary colors of Mr. Trump. And they refused it again. So I said, what is your problem? He said, well, the problem, first of all, I mean, this is against our business model, right? A very American approach. It's against our business model. They thought that if our readers, and they may lose access to the White House and whatever. But next to that, they said, look, listen, and you're also wrong because Trump is not a Hitler. I said, no, but that's not my argument. My argument is, you're dealing with a fascist. And a fascist is, yeah, no, but based on our movies, for us, a fascist is a Hitler. I said, well, what about reading books instead of going to the movies all the time? Because there is a difference. There's a fundamental difference. Yeah, but next to that, he's not violent. I said, well, you can wait for it. As I argue in my essay, when it's in the language, it will come out. Anyway, also complete denial. And of course, I was suspect because I'm a European, I'm not familiar with American exceptionalism, and it was only populism, and they knew how to deal with it. Anyway, also at that time, some of the pundits who are now publishing all those books, basically underscoring what I wrote already in 2010, they also were part of the denials. And I've been thinking myself, how come that intelligent people, because they are not stupid, didn't see what was coming? Why is it that they didn't see it? And my simple explanation again is political amnesia. Because the fact is that in 1947, two of my intellectual heroes, the French philosopher Albert Camus and the German novelist, Nobel Prize Laureate, true anti-fascist Thomas Mann, independent of each other, wrote, don't make the mistake, 47, don't make the mistake, the war is over, but fascism did not disappear. Fascism is a kind of political cancer that can always return in any form of a mass democracy. And based on that, I realized that, of course, the fascist mindset in our time will not present itself in black uniform or silly gestures like Musk and the others are now doing. It's pretty boring, I must say. But the character of the mindset of fascism will not have changed. And this is how you can recognize this. Number one, the new fascist leader will present himself always as the anti-politician, the strong man, the leader who will cure society from all social evil at day one or within 100 days. And knowing that that's not true, he has no other choice than to deceive his millions of believers with slogans, false promises, the return to a never-existing past, a rich and never-ending variety of enemies, and to exploit their resentment and fear, and last but not least, with endless propaganda to manipulate their habits and opinions. And with social media, the propaganda machines are more effective than ever. Number two, he has no other interest than self-interest, and his lack of ideas and vision will be hidden by blaming all kinds of scapegoats. It's because of those people, and his disinterest in the rest of the world promoted as a brilliant strategy to make his own country great again. His worldview will be profoundly materialistic and favor extreme forms of nationalism and tribalism. Fourth, he will be a pathological liar, and his politics of lies underscores how right Thomas Mann was when in 1940, in a lecture entitled War and Democracy, he warned his audience in Los Angeles in 1940, quote, "Let me tell you the whole truth. If ever fascism should come to America, it will come in the name of freedom." End of quote, Thomas Mann, 1940. Fifth, he's the anti-democrat who despises the free press and prefers to make any judge he doesn't like suspect. Six, the habit of using X or whatever there is, social truth or true social, and all that's like it, indulge in name-calling and avoid any serious intellectual debate is exemplary of the populist demagogue who despises the life of the mind and the spirit of democracy. And last point, he will demand an unconditional loyalty, and his incapability to accept any form of criticism, plus his self-image of being a genius, always characterizes the authoritarian. Well, if you keep these kind of 7 characteristics in mind, you have a pretty good paradigm to realize who is the fascist leader and who not. Okay. In the beginning of his brilliant book, Homage to Catalonia, George Orwell of 1984, his classic memoir of the time that he was fighting during the Spanish Civil War, he makes the following confession. I quote, "When I came to Spain, and for some time afterwards, I was not only uninterested in the political situation, but unaware of it. I knew there was a war going on, but I had no notion what kind of war. If you had asked me why I had joined the militia, I should have answered, to fight against fascism. And if you had asked me what I was fighting for, I should have answered, common decency. Common decency." Now, I wholeheartedly agree with Orwell. Fascism is the opposite, it's the enemy of common decency. Yet, being that the case, the crucial question, which no one can ignore, is how come that then and now millions of people in Europe, USA, Latin America prefer the fascist mindset above common decency? Why? I've been asking myself, what is it in fascism that is so seductive? That so many people so easily can give up on, ignore or forget to cultivate common decency? Now, a clue to the answer of this question was given to me a couple of years ago when I was invited to participate in the Netherlands in a panel on democracy and culture organized by the youth movement of the Dutch Conservative Party, which in the last 2 decades is the dominating party in our country, and they are still in government. For till a year ago, they had their own prime minister, who's now the Secretary General of NATO, but they are still, it's really now in control by our own fascist wielders, but they're still in the government. And it's a party for basically for business people and for young, aspiring people who also wants to become a successful in business or an entrepreneur, lawyer, or maybe even a politician. And so my role in that panel was to say something about the importance of the arts for democratic civilization. Yet even before I could take the microphone, a youngster came forward to make the following statement. He urged the Prime Minister, Margaret, who was there at that time, seated on the front seat, to make sure that no longer even €1 would be spent on subsidies for arts or art education. All art and that cultural stuff, if it's successful, it will sell. And if it's not what people want, well, then it's no use. So we do not need to support it. That was his brave statement before I even could say one word. You know, why spend money on this kind of nonsense? If you're successful, you make money. If you're not successful, then why should we spend money on it? And from the audience, around 200 of those kids, he got a big applause for being so brave to make this honest, blunt statement. And they all supported it. So I was then given the opportunity to respond, and I said, well, look, if this is how all of you think, I will not waste you and my time with a plea why the arts and the humanities do matter. But I do have a question to you, I said to the young man. I said, look, do I understand correctly that you are against support for the arts, even art education, because it's not useful? And he, with his time, yes. I said, okay, well, but why is this so important for you that everything has to be useful? And he was surprised by my question, but after a few seconds of silence, he said, well, if it's not useful, it's of course not really important. So I said, okay, just to be sure that I understand you correctly, only what is useful is really important. Yes, of course. But then allow me, I told him, to ask you the following. Do you have to have a significant other, is there a great love in your life? And he smiled and I said, oh yes, but absolutely there she is, right? This pretty beautiful girl in the audience. I said to him, well, congratulations. But no, forgive me my curiosity. But the two of you, are you planning maybe to get married or have children? Oh, yes. Why? So what? I said, well, I just wonder if you want to marry her and have children because that's useful to you. Because if not, then according to your own explanation, your relationship with her and your children are not really important to you. He was silent. And it was not a very pleasant conversation. But for me, it was a quite telling illustration how right Schiller, who you may know from the end of Beethoven's Ninth, all men become brother, all mensen weer broeder, that's Schiller. The poet and great friend of Goethe, who at the end of the 19th century in his letters on the aesthetic education of man, already in the second letter observed, usefulness has become the ultimate idol of our time, to which everything is subordinate. With this, the whole notion that quantity has taken over quality, that everything is reduced to numbers. A number is the big deity of our time. And the same observation around the time was made by Alexis de Tocqueville when he had this tour through America. He also realized that usefulness is a typical characteristic of the democratic mindset, which is being practical, material, scientific, present, and future-oriented. Now, with a paradigm based on these coordinates, it's almost unavoidable that when we ask ourselves which choices to be made given the limited time to our lifespan, our incompassible show the direction to what is most useful. And indeed, the choice of your profession, you will ask what is most useful. The choice of education in that profession, what is most useful. Your choice of how to spend your money wisely earned by your hard work, what in general is most useful. The choice, what kind of investments should be made, what is most useful. Philanthropy, what is most useful. But if we ask ourselves a complete different question, the much more fundamental and in many ways almost forgotten questions like how to become a human being, how to end the crisis of the mind, how to realize a civilization in which every human being can live their life in dignity and liberty, then what? Robert Oppenheimer, I presume a very familiar name here, despite the fact that he is known as the father of the nuclear bomb, and it may sound paradoxically, but his life and the education he has had has become for me exemplary of how to get out of the current crisis of the mind, the crisis of civilization, and how to deal with the apocalyptic threats the world is facing. You all know, on the 6th of August 1945, a single atomic bomb destroyed the entire city of Hiroshima, and on the 9th of August, a second bomb destroyed the entire city of Nagasaki. So Robert Oppenheimer went down in history as the man who made it possible. And he famously must have said, well, he said, because you can see it on YouTube, I've now become Death, the destroyer of worlds. And he knew he had blood on his hands. If you have seen the movie Oppenheimer, I mean, there is this episode with Truman. But he clung to the thought that firstly, the Americans and not the Nazis had won the war, had won it, and now that Japan was defeated, the lives of many American soldiers had been spared. And secondly, he was profoundly convinced that precisely because of the consequences of the use of an atomic weapon were so terrible, it would make future wars impossible, thereby promoting world peace. Now, years went by, and on March 12, 1963, 4 years before his death, Oppenheimer gave a talk at the invitation of the National Book Awards in New York with the title The Added Cubit, which is a reference to the Sermon on the Mountain, which is part of the Gospels, in Matthew's Gospel, in which, among other things, Jesus tells his listeners that those who serve God need have no anxieties about their lives. God takes care of everything, and furthermore, and then, quote unquote, in the Gospel of Matthew, can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life or a single cubit to your height? Right? Basically, the message then in the Gospel is everything is in the hands of God. So don't worry. Don't worry, be happy. Now, after everything he had experienced in life, this was a talk that he wanted to make as a kind of intellectual will and testament. And in contrast to Jesus, Oppenheimer contended that each person, rather than trusting in faith, in God, or in political leaders, must continue to think for themselves. So he respectfully disagrees. He says to this audience in New York, by taking thought of our own grim responsibility, by knowing something of our profound and omnipresent imperfection, we can help our children's children to a world less cruel, perhaps even less unjust, less likely to end in a catastrophe beyond words. We may even find our way out to put an end to the orgy, the killing, and the brutality of this war. And he continued with the observation that in our secular age, we have lost something that can be found. That in our secular age we have lost something that can be found in the great religions. I quote, "A truth whose recognition seems to me essential to the very possibility of a permanently peaceful world, and to be indispensable also in our dealings with the people with radically different history and culture and tradition. It's the knowledge of the inwardness of evil, and an awareness that in our dealings with this, we are very close to the center of life." He continues, "When we are blind to the evil in ourselves, we dehumanize ourselves. And we deprive ourselves not only of our own destiny, but of any possibility of dealing with the evil in others. So Oppenheimer concludes this remarkable lecture with the comment that exactly because of this, the arts are fundamentally important since, I quote, "It is almost wholly through the arts that we have a living reminder of the terror, of the nobility, of what we can be and what we are." End of quote. So with his argument, almost at the end of his life, that we as people are ourselves responsible for the world in which we live, that each of us is capable of terror and all evil, but also of life-creating nobility of spirit, Oppenheimer repeats what he had learned long before and had discovered through his own life and experience. And in a certain way, at the end of his life, it takes him back to the years of his youth. Because his parents, he grew up in a complete secular Jewish family, pretty well-to-do. And his parents chose to send their elder son, Robert, to a school in New York that would teach and would mold him into a European humanist. And it was, quote, the ethical culture school at 33 Central Park West, not far from the apartment where the Oppenheimers lived. And the founder and the headmaster of the school, Felix Adler, was a family friend, valued by Oppenheimer's parents for the fact that he still knew that the concept of education comes from Latin educare, which means to bring up. And the essence of the humanism in which Adler wanted to bring up his pupil was for him best expressed by Immanuel Kant in the closing lines of his critique of practical reason. The famous lines, I quote, "Two things fill the human mind with every new and increasing admiration and awe. The oftener and the more steadily we reflect on them, the starry heavens above and the moral law within." Now, every tradition is a collection of echoes in which the original sources resonate. So this famous remark by Kant is also an echo in the tradition of European humanism, of which the source for me is the philosophy of the Greek philosopher Socrates. In Western cultural history, Socrates is the first one to place the idea of humanity at the center, and with it the puzzle of our own existence. Because what is humankind? What is its nature? What is our destiny? What's the point of our existence? Where can we human beings find an answer to the great inescapable questions in life? What is a good life? What is a good society? And from what we do, we derive the value. From what can we do we derive the value of our own existence? Why are we confronted by so many questions in our life, so many accursed questions to which we probably will never find an answer? Why is this happening to me? Why is that somebody I love so much dies unexpectedly? Why this illness? Why I'm losing my job, etc. So the human being, according to Socrates, is a creature with a dual nature. We have our physical, earthly, mortal existence, but we distinguish ourselves from the animal kingdom by the fact that we are also spiritual beings. We know the world of ideas and values, which are eternal and immortal. We know about truth, about goodness and beauty. We know the essence of freedom and justice, love and mercy. Why? Because we have a soul. And if people have a problem with the word soul, you can talk about an inner eye or an inner compass or whatever there is. And according to Socrates and Kant, everyone has been given the freedom to make this choice, right? You can degenerate into and become an animal or elevate yourself according to the values that allow your life to be dignified and meaningful. And for that very reason, humankind's most important concern is to take care for your soul or your inner compass or your inner eye, whatever you want to call it. And Socrates was profoundly convinced that you do better suffer injustice than do injustice, because that means debasing and defiling your own soul. Well, anyway, everybody has to make their own choices and find their own wisdom and make their life meaningful and do something with it. But again, according to the Greeks, something very important has been given to us, and it's called paideia. In German, you call it Bildung. In English, you call it liberal education. But it was most profoundly expressed again by Cicero, who said, "Cultura animi philosophia est." The cultivation of your soul is the quest for wisdom. It's the quest for wisdom. And this quest for wisdom, this cultivation of the soul, will not be provided, with all due respect, by science, technology, economic mathematics, which is now at the core of all the universities, but it's provided by the humanities. It's provided by art, it's provided by philosophy, it's provided by literature, because it will provide you the grammar of life. And I'm deeply convinced with Oppenheimer and Thomas Mann and Socrates, I mean this whole humanist tradition, that this ideal of civilization, of humanism, it's what we lost and that needs to flourish again. So if by now I have to answer the question, what went wrong with the West? My answer is, the West has given up, even betrayed, its own tradition of humanism in its blind quest for money and power, covered up by the false idea that all that's useful is what's most important and meaningful. So, has humanism and its ideal of civilization been destroyed forever? Well, again, the fact is that the fascist spirit, the anti-spirit of European humanism, is present everywhere and manifesting itself in all kinds of forms. And again, this is not very surprising, because we have been dealing with the revaluation of values, which was predicted by Nietzsche, right? Material and utilitarian values that are in opposition to spiritual and moral values are more dominant than ever. Again, quantity above quality. And the notion that with the coming of the atomic bomb there would be no more wars has proven to be vain hope. Furthermore, the danger that nuclear weapons, already far more destructive than the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, will be used is greater than ever. But the fact is also, however, that what Robert Oppenheimer learned as a young boy at his ethical culture school remains true. Human beings are free. There is a cultural treasure house, and this black hole is part of the tradition that can provide us with the education through which we can become aware both of evil that lurks in each of us and of our inner eye, the moral law within. We can therefore rise above our animal nature and make spiritual and moral values our own, so that our own lives will be dignified and meaningful, and the world in which we live more peaceful. We can choose to continue to reflect and to take responsibility for our own lives and for our fellow human beings and for coming generations and the ability of planet Earth. Everyone has the freedom to choose to live in truth, to create beauty, to be just, compassionate, and to say no. To say no to the forces and the powers which there are now. There is no reason to go with the flow and to comply with them, which you now see happening in America, right? I mean, Columbia University has an endowment of $15 billion, and they comply to Trump for a stupid $400 million. The rich law firms, they have endless money, and still they are, writing the checks all the time to be a friend of the president. It's just disgusting. Anyway, Oppenheimer knew that his legacy would be the atomic bomb, the weapon that could destroy the human species and its humanism. So at the end of his life, 4 years before he died, he wanted to leave us this too: the knowledge that there is one weapon that can still destroy the atomic bomb, fascism, and the cult of death. And for me, that's the flag of hope, a universal humanism and its concern for the human soul. Was this 40 minutes? Almost. Okay, thank you.
That was fascinating, and it was so rich that I don't know where to begin, but let me start here. It's about the universality of human thinking. So let me start here. You detailed 6 aspects of fascism and what makes fascism so attractive to peoples everywhere. As I was listening to those 6, and as people here were listening to those 6, the same thought must have crossed your mind as crossed mine. Here is somebody who says, I have the answers to everything. I will make us great again. My political enemies are conspiring against me. Decency is not necessary for me to talk to them or to anyone. Sycophants are welcome. Those who question are rejected. That man hasn't had as good piece of luck as Mr. Trump has, but right now he's in a bad patch. But once he comes out, he'll be no different from either Trump or the man across the border, Modi, or Orban, or so many others. And so this seems to be part of the human condition, that we want to obey, we want to follow, we don't want to question. We are sheep. At some level, we are sheep. Why? And I think the answer has to be sought in evolutionary biology, because it is advantageous for us to be sheep in some ways, because then we have a community around us which can give us protection. And this is how caveman evolved upwards. If we didn't collaborate with each other, if we didn't obey the leader, we would never have come to this complex stage of human activity ever. We wouldn't have been able to form civilizations. And so, on the one hand, the elements needed for fascism are the same elements that are needed for creating civilization.
No. No. Would be nice, but no, that's not true. No, but look, I completely follow your analysis, Anderson. That's all correct. Again, as I said, well, we are this animal with a dual nature, right? So on the one hand, yes, I mean, look, it's almost natural that if you can choose the easy way or the difficult way, the natural choice is let's go the easy way, right? This is why Robert Frost wrote this wonderful poem on, take the road not taken. Because, and we also, I mean, I'm sure that in your own rich cultural heritage, I mean, you must have similar stories as Dostoevsky wrote about, that people don't want to be free, right? Because with freedom, the real freedom is always a difficult freedom. It comes with responsibilities. And to accept responsibilities, well, you make your life a little bit less easy than it could be. But here is the thing. Everything in life comes with a price. Everything in life, by definition, comes with a price. Spinoza has a wonderful phrase about it. When you say yes to the one, you always say no to something else. So yes, you can go with the flow. You can make your life more easy, and many people will do that. But there is this wonderful story by Tolstoy on the death, entitled "The Death of Ivan Ilyich." It's a very short story, and it's about a bureaucrat who did everything correct, right? I mean, the right friends, the right dinner parties, the right steps to make his career in the bureaucracy, and everybody was happy, and he was, and of course, all fine, everything according to the book. But then suddenly he get cancer, and when he get his cancer, the people of whom he thought that he were his best friends were no longer there, because he was no longer of interest to them. And so at the end of his life, he started realizing himself, what is it that I've done with my life? And they realized that the only thing he has done with his life is do what the others wanted him to be. He was no longer a free human being. His life was an empty shell. Now, this is the thing that Nietzsche so brilliantly realized when he predicted that Europe, larger part of the world, will end up in 200 years of nihilism. Because this is the horror story in Europe at the dawn of a democratic society. Simultaneously, we got the rise of fascism. Fundamentally, people rejected the idea of a democracy, that's to say, accepting your own responsibility, taking care for the kind of society. And so it was not in the 30s, it was 1919 that Mussolini started his movement, and in the 20s that Ortega y Gasset started to write his book on the revolt of the masses. And the masses are not, quote unquote, just ordinary people, but most of them academics. Pretty well educated people who thought, oh, but my career and all these things. So again, it's a natural temptation to go with the flow, to make you find things more easy. But the price you pay for it is you end up with a dead soul.
Yes, but this points to us being an insufficiently evolved species. We have wonderful technology now. Over the last 400 years, we've transformed the face of the earth. And yet, our genes are pretty much the same as they were 6,000, 10,000, 20,000 years ago. So the real problem to me seems to be the slow rate at which that understanding of the environment has impacted our genes. And now there's something very frightening up ahead, and that is the way in which we are able to alter ourselves, the way in which we understand the nature of intelligence, the way in which we know that our values, no, not values, but the way in which we know our reactions, our emotions are actually programmed into us, and that we are neural nets. If we are neural nets, can we hope for a better future?
Okay, so here it's very difficult because you're such a brilliant scientist.
Mike.
Oh, sorry, you're such a brilliant. Oh, yes, of course, you're such a brilliant scientist. And I'm just a writer. But I respectfully disagree with you on 2 points. First of all, the awareness after World War I. Look, so before World War I, Europe, considered itself the epicenter of the world. We were the big colonial power. And then the whole thing destroyed because, as I also quoted, religion turned out to be a lie. Science was a lie. Everything was a lie. Everything was a lie. And Europe was in ruin. It's also interesting that at that moment, till World War I, Beethoven was the icon of Europe, our cultural icon. After World War I, this icon model was taken over by Superman from America. There was no Beethoven anymore. It was Superman who we all wanted to believe in. The American Superman. And they came to the conclusion, Mussel, who was an engineer, Wittgenstein, who was an engineer, that indeed the technological progress was far ahead of our moral progress. Why? Well, because we are not machines. We are human beings with this double nature, with a kind of spirit, with a soul, an inner compass, whatsoever. And that has to be, that's the essence, that's what Paideia and Confucius or the Buddha or Zoroaster or whatever they are realize. It's about the cultivation of the human soul. It's about education at the very moment, because this is my, again, Nietzsche in 1874 gave a speech. He was 25, was professor at Basel. The student organization asked him, "Oh, professor, can you give a lecture for us?" And he did. He spoke about the future of education. And he said to the students, he said, "I pity you. I pity you, because the school of civilization is over. Your education will be reduced to what's good for the state and what's good for the economy, and the only thing, and you don't care, because the only thing you're interested in is making money, and if possible a lot of money." And it's a little bit embarrassing. Now we lost the embarrassment not to know who Beethoven and Mozart and Goethe were, but not too much, because this is. I always tell students, if you see a university on the Shanghai list, don't go. Because it has nothing to do with university. It's all utilitarian stuff, and to make you rich and famous or whatever. And the top scientist who doesn't know anything more than this little millimeter thing of its own science. So again, what went wrong with the West is it became a utilitarian society, full of itself, with all its technology, now Silicon Valley, whatever. And now I have to buy this nonsense from Silicon Valley that our human nature is just this bunch of neurons or whatever. No.
Okay, so that's.
We'll save this for the conference, right?
We'll never get to an agreement on that. When you say man is not a machine, I don't know. It could be. But now I have a question comes to my mind, and maybe we can ask people over here as well. You speak of an inner voice of, nobody disputes the soul. I mean, that's part of our societal ethos. But that little voice that speaks inside you, which you call conscience, and which actually has a translation in Arabic, Urdu, ज़मीर. तो मेरा सवाल आपसे ये है कि ज़मीर का लफ्ज़ जो है आप महीने में, हफ्ते में, दिन में कितनी बार सुनते हैं? कभी सुनाई देता? हाँ, सुनाई देता है या नहीं? आपको ये बताया जाता है कि ये ठीक है, ये गलत है. This is right, that is wrong. But the conscience doesn't seem to have that place here as it seems to have there. Am I right or am I wrong on this? We will get into a discussion on this, and maybe this is a good point to turn into the audience now. So, yes.
First of all, it's really good topic for discussion. It's also related to my PhD thesis, which I recently submitted. I think you are engaging with the topic more from a materials aspect, like but the conscious,
actually
it's a biological,
cultural. I mean, there's a lot of similarity in humans, but in terms of cultures, there's always a difference.
Yeah. You raised a point about.
I was saying that I don't hear the word conscience in our society.
But conscious can also be expressed or discussed in some different terminologies. For example, you are also mentioning about the value system and the framing. So the answer, what you are searching for, is the cognitive frames, which are also like seeds, which when we are conditioning to certain terminologies, are learning about the society. So those frames are actually, they are going deeper, and then they connect to your deep value systems. Value systems, I mean the cultural narratives. For example, here in this society, we say we should respect the elders. And that is a kind of a frame which is seeded, and then it grows, and then we as a person grow with it. So I would not say that man is a machine, because a machine cannot think. And also the second thing is that you can't ask a machine moral questions. So
you can program a machine with moral values.
Yeah,
for example, ask ChatGPT now to describe the situation in Gaza.
With
And
a
it
lot
won't.
of respect,
It
but
will
you are
not.
coming from an
It will
engineering
not.
side. So
Ask JTP.
if you ask
who-
an anthropologist, they would disagree with you.
ask JTP who you are. Listen, no. This JTP is a fraud. It's a fraud, a
It's
complete
also
fraud.
feeded the way how to think. Like it is not thinking, but it is just fed with commands and calculations, and in the end it comes to 1 and 0. So how can 1 and 0 then think? So we as a human living beings, we have conscious, and that conscious here, which we call Zamir is actually, we have reduced it. So I think we are more approaching the problem from a neoliberal perspective, and that's why it is having some issues.
Well, again, listen, and I'm in a difficult position here because I'm not a scientist, and so in many ways So basically, I'll talk about articles of faith, and my article of faith is that if you want to make your life meaningful, so that when you're on your deathbed and you think about what is that I've been doing, it must be very depressing to think I've been a machine. And I want to have faith in the fact that I'm a free human being and therefore responsible by my own choices, and that my own choices, if I'm not a complete egotistical, autistic, narcissistic figure like the people who are now running the show most of the time in the world, you want to contribute to do something well to others. And once there was a culture, I mean, in Baghdad, or you had the House of Wisdom, you had the Library of Alexandria, and the Karl Jaspers, the German philosopher, psychologist, kind of polyhistor, the man, wrote I think it was in the 70s, his book on the universal history, in which he discovered a thing what he called the axial age. And the axial age is the spirit in the history of humankind that around 800 BC, you had Confucius in China, the Buddha in India, Zoroaster in Persia, you had the Greek philosophy, you had the Jewish prophets. And in between 800 and 400 before Christ, there was this awareness about this thing called human dignity. A machine doesn't know a shit about human dignity. And that was a moment in when we started also to realize that whatever our differences are, at the end of the day and at the beginning of the day, we are all human beings. So why is it that we have lost so much capacity to live together as a united humankind? And why is it that we have those terrible ideas related to tribalism, nationalism, all the brilliant things you wrote about in your great book on Pakistan, right? So there's I think it's, and unfortunately, despite all the wonderful miracles technology gave us in terms of medicine, of understanding things, whatever, it has not the capacity to deal with this. The opposite is true. No, you wrote about it yourself, and this is why I'm so fascinated by the story of Robert Oppenheimer. One of the most brilliant scientists in the 20th century. On the one hand, a man with a huge responsibility for getting this weapon, and for the first time in the history of humankind, we have a weapon that can destroy everything. Was never there before. Now it's there, and then 4 years before he dies, he goes back to his youth and reminded him what he learned at his ethical school of culture. No ChatGPT can replace an ethical school of culture. And so all those people are now promoting this are just their businessmen and don't believe in it. Get it out of your system.
Let's leave this as an open question whether morality can be programmed into computers or not. Maybe it can be, maybe it cannot be. But You know,
You're
you,
an
s-
optimist.
you said that when you're on your deathbed and you ask, am I dying happy? Well, if it's a machine, if we are machines, we can answer that in the affirmative. I was a good machine. I did what I was programmed to do. And this is what suicide bombers do, don't they? They were programmed to act in a certain way.
But this is also
So,
what Brave
aren't
New
we?
World. But this is also what Brave New World of Aldous Huxley is all about, right? And yes, there are millions of people, and even more than that, who are programmed through our economic system and our educational system to be a machine, to be part of the system.
No, we have.
Hello, sir. Thank you for the insightful talk. So the question related to conscience, I have the answer that we do have conscience because we cannot teach values to donkeys. We cannot teach to donkey to say that how to meet a person or how the values work. It is our conscience which tells us how to greet people. And I think Emmanuel Kant explained it very well, that there is a chip in our mind already, and it applies the good and bad thing to everything which we do. That chip precedes which we do in our daily works. It applies that order to everything which we do in our daily life. So I think Emmanuel Kant explained it very well. But I have a question for the Riemen, sir, that Karl Marx explained in his Communist Manifesto that the bourgeois, and which are called the capitalists, they are erasing every class of the society, and only one class is emerging, that is capitalist, and that class only thinks in terms of money. And I in my opinion, it is true, because in today's world, the most important problem is climate change and global warming. But no bigger country focus on that problem to solve it, because it is against their corporate values and their business values. So what do you think, how much capitalists have a great factor in the question which is written in the board, that what went wrong with the West? Thank you.
No, excellent point. Well, there is some good news, and even proven quite recently. So my father was a union leader. I grew up with a father organizing strikes all the time, right? To fight for social justice, to make sure that the world, who has all the power, cannot do whatever they want. So when Musk started all his actions in America, destroying, fortunately, Tesla is going down, right? And not yet bankrupt, but hopefully not too long. Because that's the power we have in a society which is still a free society. In a totalitarian society, it's much more difficult. But the power of a free society is we don't have to buy those products. We don't have to comply to the system. No, we can do things in a different way. And so again, climate change, which definitely will part of our conference on Apocalypse Now. Again, tune in on November 22, then you can follow all of it. Will be high on the agenda. But again, climate change was many forms of activism, to deal with this. And one of the speakers at the conference is now Guy Harrington, who wrote a wonderful book on, in success, that we have to stop with this thinking about economic growth, and instead of economic growth, how to have a much more fair distribution of all the wealth there is. Because I cannot speak about your country, but the West is extremely rich. And therefore we we are supposed to have a tax system, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, so for me, but this is why I'm so focused on the rise of the fascist movement, because the fascist movement is what you now can see happening again in Hungary. Probably will happen in Romania. It's happening definitely in America. It's happening in Argentina. The first thing they do is to take away freedoms, and not only that, take away science, take away education, take away culture, which means make people dumb as hell. That's what they do.
Hello, sir. Firstly, your talk was very, very thought-provoking. And second, as we talk about what's going wrong, talking about morality and all of this stuff, sir, do you really think that previously it was reason and questioning that changed and altered the faith of particularly Europe and then rest of the world? It is actually the postmodernism maybe that has taken so much away from us. There is no anchor. I, as a student, I really feel, at first I get like, postmodernism in particular is very attractive, but it does not give you an anchor and no belief system. So when your talk, like while I was listening to you, I actually felt maybe a theorist like Michel Foucault and others, we need alternatives to them so that we can have a stronger hold. And then we talked about, you mentioned, while closing your talk, okay, there should be, like, you have the choice and everything. I'm really confused. Do I have the choice? And as sir was talking about Zamir and consciousness, we do have consciousness, but in today's age, do we have the true consciousness, or we're left in a false consciousness? Because my decisions, the options and the choices I make, apparently it's free, but I'm not free in making them. Even if I'm the one taking the decision, I do not feel that much empowered in my decisioning because of the overpowering social structures that are so programmed.
Small correction, I mentioned conscience, not consciousness. Two different things. But
well, excellent remarks. Look, I wholeheartedly agree with you with the damage done by the ideas of postmodernism. And I'm always a little bit careful with phrasing the things I say, because again, if people have a problem with the word soul, then okay, then let's change it and say something, the same thing but in a different way. Indeed, the problem one of the problems in the West was when an ideology took over, and this ideology took away. Okay, let me put it this way: people should decide for themselves, in my view, whether they are religious, yes or no. It's a personal choice. If they can believe in something, yes or no, it's not my thing. But the one thing we are not allowed to give up is the fact that there are transcendental values. And for me, this is covered by the world of humanism, whether it's Socrates or Spinoza or whatever, Thomas Mann. None of them were very religious people. Spinoza definitely not. But they did not give the notion that there are transcendental values and that we, with our soul and our brain, although for Spinoza the highest form of knowledge was intuition, right? So, and I always say, well, there is bad news and good news. The bad news is human nature did not change, so these animal instincts will always be there. The good news is people have, for me, an inborn capacity to know what quality is. You know deep inside who's a real friend or not. You know deep inside if it's real love, yes or no. You know deep inside if you do something meaningful, yes or no. We know these things. So that's the capacity to develop. It can be developed. And again, I'm not against science or politics or whatever, be a great scientist, be a great politician, but don't give up what universities are supposed to give you, and that's the knowledge of the universitas, right? I mean, how to deal with life. That's what liberal education, how to get through life. So that's what it should be. Now, already the fact that you are aware of the fact that there is something like a false consciousness makes you already more free than anybody else, because you have already this critical capacity, to see these things are happening. Again, there is a lot of brainwashing going on all the time, and there's also a lot of corruption. And I'm not the most boring part even are the financial and the political corruption. Much more worse is the morals corruption and the intellectual corruption. That's because that's the kind of poisons, and again, it's trying to make people, again, that they adopt themselves and that they lost their critical capacities. I mean, all the great thinkers, I mean, whatever their philosophy was, be critical. And the criticism starts being able to make the distinction, what is right, what is wrong, what is true, what is false. And as Socrates would say, and it starts with self-examination. It starts with thinking about looking into the mirror and talking to yourself, okay, what am I doing? What is it that I believe in? Why is it that I want to do these things? So we have enormous capacities, there are enormous possibilities, but with Oppenheimer, I wish that this ethical school of culture could be implemented everywhere, that you can take away what's across the street, as Professor Hoodboy told us, and that you have, the black holes. Imagine a Pakistan where there's not a black hole, not only in Islamabad, but in all the cities and different places, and that we can have this kind of conversations and discussions. I mean, that would make a tremendous difference. But again, Harvard, you have to pay $60,000, and then what is it that you get? Right. And they are brainwashing in that you cannot, without that paper, you cannot get through life.
But on postmodernism, is it a coherent framework of thought, or is it just a reaction against rationalism, against modernity? I haven't been able to figure out. I tried to read Derrida, and it's a mess of confusions. But perhaps, do you differ with that?
No. It's impossible to read.
No.
We are critical in today's age. We are critical of morals. We are critical of religion. We are critical about everything, because we actually start to deconstruct every formal institution and structure. So this, I guess, criticizing, like maybe the lack of what we are looking for, the moral and everything, is because we are criticizing so much. And then we appreciate criticism, okay, but then there is no margin. Maybe our scholars of the time should be rather, like, instead of this, should be giving us margins, because I personally feel there's no margin. When I read such people, I need somebody to give me the margin, because they take away, they deconstruct, they ask you to criticize, and then when I look back, then there is nothing left.
But hang on, there is criticism and criticism. You can be, look, because turn around the notion of no criticism, not being critical. Imagine that you never are critical about yourself, about your own behavior, about your own choices. Then you get into a mess. Imagine that you will never criticize what's going on in your society. Then you get a mess. But the criticism, if it works, should be based on some fundamental values. The cradle of European humanism is the capacity to live in truth, to do justice, to have compassion, to create beauty. I mean, there are some fundamental values which you will not give up, which you cannot completely make your own, because you're not... I mean, that's the difference between the fundamentalists. The fundamentalists will always claim they know the truth. They know what's good. They know what's evil, and if you don't agree with them, you're a heretic. You will be shot or fatwa or whatever, what kind of things they do to you. But with again, the bottom line is that you realize that there are certain moral and spiritual values which you try to make your own, and your criticism starts with a sense of self-criticism. On who are you and what are you doing? And so there is no need to live in fear that, yes, look, everything can be completely criticized if you don't believe in anything. right? But love can turn into jealousy, right? I mean, anything can be perverted. Anything can be perverted, but that's no reason not to give up on love, or not to give up on friendship and all these things. So criticism is an important thing, but it should be based on the fact that you want to be and try to be a better human being and try to strive for a better society.
So certainly I don't subscribe to postmodernism. I don't like it, but I wouldn't ever say ban it. Let them be postmodernists in whatever sense they want to be. Let them be as critical as they want about modern science, modern social science as well. But that's in the nature of things.
But
that's how
So
knowledge, that's how humanity progresses.
So
But-
do you
but
think
this-
postmodernism leads towards nihility?
No, but also look, this postmodernism did a lot of damage to education. They did a lot of damage to. Look, I mean, part of the postmodernism, what we can see in the Netherlands, is that if you now want to study Dutch literature, first of all, you have to do it in English, because the business model is they have to get students from all over the world who have to study Dutch literature in English. That's one thing. And then the professor will tell you that Proust or Tolstoy or Dostoevsky, whatever, if they would live now, they would use X or Twitter to write their novels. Nonsense. 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 No, but it's an ideology which has taken over.
To a little more mundane things, I wanted to ask, I have this feeling that in Western democracies, the difference between the center of center of left and center of right parties is fading away. So essentially, both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, or the Labour and Tory Party, and similarly also in Europe, they are essentially run by rich men and women. So, and the sad part is that in the US elections, the Republicans have been able to hugely woo the working class as well. So my question was, are there any counter movements to this two-party system, which is actually the same system? It's one system of the rich. So I would be more interested if you could tell me if there are any smaller movements or parties in Europe in particular that are left-leaning or that are working towards a more egalitarian society.
Well, so the tragedy about the West, but also the tragedy of Europe, is, and it started in the 80s, and even more in the 90s. Now let's also the fall of the Berlin Wall. With the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of history, you got what Clinton and Blair called the third way. And the third way was political jargon for what we now call is neoliberalism. And with all the technological capacities, we got globalization, right? I mean, if I now want to do business with our credit card company, instead of somebody in the Netherlands, I'll get somebody in India or Philippines on the line because that's much cheaper, right? So neoliberalism it's not only an economic model, it's a political model, and it was based on, again, the fundamental lie, coming from my political house, what used to be my political house, because it's no longer there, the Social Democrats, and it was based on the fact that, we too can make you rich. We too can make you rich. Now, people are not that stupid. People realize that if the message is no longer solidarity, no longer social justice, but it is, we can also make you rich, then we'll go to the original. And this is what the Republicans called the Conservatives has been doing. So this is how social democratic parties got destroyed in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Italy, in France, almost everywhere, right? So it's a self-inflicted thing. One thing. The second thing is that when I grew up, I was born in 1962, there were still a lot of public intellectuals. And political parties had their own little intellectual centers to reflect on this. Okay. They are all gone. They're all gone, which is part of the complete destruction of our educational system, because everything was about usefulness, how to make a lot of money, etc., etc. So the world of ideas is no longer there. Worse, and he knows it, I'm on a crusade to keep a book culture alive. And a book is a book and not something you can download from the internet. It's something completely different. So the crime of the century, to speak with music from Supertramp, the crime of the century is what we have done to education and what we have done to the world of ideas. And when you take away these things, you get those. Okay, so now people, almost too late, but hopefully not too late, realizes the destruction which has been done. On an intellectual level, in moral issues, on education, how it impacts climate change, how it impacts, all the conflicts which are there, etc., etc., etc. And this is also such a tragedy. Most of the people who voted for the Trumps of this world will be most affected by it. They will pay. They are the first one to pay the price. The question is, do they really first have to pay the price before they start thinking again? But really, can we blame them? Because if you realize that there is no education anymore, if you see the brainwashing which is going on by the television shows. Recently, we spoke with an extremely well-informed American who used to work for the CIA. So he's not. He knows things, literally. And he said the problem now with America is that everybody lives in their own information bubble. And so there's not even an awareness of what the facts are. So again, well, for me, social media are poison, complete poison. But how to get them out of that cave? How to get people out of this, the dominant ideologies which are there? And that the purpose of life is not about making money or, other tribal instincts. You see, so again, I come back to the same point. Yes, of course there will be a counter movement, and yes, of course there is but again, the lessons of my father as a union leader: can we do it on time? Can we get it organized? Can we get a political program? Can we get the people right there to the right thing? Now, a little bit optimistic note, what's happening now in America is a big wake-up call for us in Europe, because Europe has been lazy for more than 50 years. We thought, okay, let the Americans pay for our defense, and Russia, cheap energy, cheap gas, and with the Chinese we do a business, and we became a very decadent, materialistic, pretty stupid society. Okay, the Americans' defense is over, cheap energy with Russia is over, and the Chinese, they have their own business model. So if we don't get our act together in the next 10 years, we are big trouble. But do we have the right people to do it?
Okay, let's.
Is this working? My biggest takeaways from your talk, one was when you spoke about the crisis of the mind, and the second was cultivating the soul. And I think these two kind of like boil down to the crux of the problem right now that the whole world is going through. And I like the word that you've used, cultivating the soul, because it has aspects of nurturing and growth and development. But in these times, where do you, and especially if you take education as, okay, one thread of the issue, because it's a very complex problem and we've come across so many aspects of the reasons and the influences that are affecting all of this. But within this complexity, if we just take education as one aspect where we can see a movement and a change, you see, I'm going to make a difference between the East and the West over here, because in our Eastern system of education, we had aspects of the human being, a holistic system in which intellect, or the mind was just one aspect, and then there was the heart and the spirit and the body. But we've lost these learnings and these part of our education over, over the decades and the centuries, especially after, being in the post-colonial periods. And bringing these aspects, and they've been corrupted in many ways. Well, maybe my answer, I don't really have a question, but my thought is, how do you start fixing this? Because it's not something which has to be developed. It just has to be rediscovered, because it does exist. But it just seems impossible, because there's just so much Western influence. And there's this need to Westernize, especially in the global South. That there's a dichotomy, because you've got to bring back what we actually had, because that was the road to success. But we need to now take a U-turn. And it's getting more and more impossible with this loud social media and this influence.
Well, a few thoughts. First of all, I recently read a book. Yeah, okay. I recently read a book, there are now many books about the end of the American world order, right? There's America is on its way down. Europe will have to see, but there was China and Russia and the global South, and so okay. And the people who are in favor of it, well, wonderful. But I thought, well, in what way will the American world order? Because if I even go here, Gucci, Dior, the big shopping malls are all the same. I bought my socks off. I lost my shoes when we came from. I forgot my shoes, so we had to buy new shoes and socks and Hugo Boss. So that's one thing. Then the Silicon Valley thing. Well, the social media. So the power might be different or whatever, but the mental power, exactly as you said, is now it's a global phenomenon, right? Okay, so and even the way we dress and the way we talk. Okay, so and yes, I also agree with you. We lost something very fundamental in it, and that's related to my notions of usefulness, etc., etc., etc. So again, how to get out? Well, it's what we start doing here, right? What makes me hopeful is, first of all, I always say there is no energy in pessimism. So don't be pessimistic, right? Because then you stay in your bed or whatever. You become a banker and rich, but it's okay. No pessimism. That's one thing. The second thing is that in our history, now we're talking about European history, we had quote unquote our dark age, the Middle Ages, etc., etc., etc. While the culture here was much more thriving, and there was an Arab culture who took care for our classics, etc., etc., etc. But then, in this dark age, we had our monasteries. And out of those monasteries, could glow, we could have the Renaissance culture, and out of the Renaissance, the Enlightenment. Yes, I'm very much afraid that we are now entering a real dark age again. But during a dark age in which we are now, treasure the black holes. Make sure there will be a few more of them. That's why Evelyn and I continue the work we are doing, because, quote unquote, the big things will not do it. The universities will not save us. The political class will not save us. The big companies will not do it. It has, as usual, come from bottom up, which was always the case. And then let's hope we can do it, that we get connected, and that we do it before idiots blow up the whole thing.
I think we should perhaps be realistic of what existed in the past rather than romanticize it. Do you think there was actual justice at the time of Jahangir?
Speaking of the medieval age.
Yes, but that's, well, in Europe. Here, were there superior values then as compared to now? I think that's a big open question over there. There is more justice today. Yes, it's very bad. I know the Kacheri and the Adalats here are terrible. But do you think there was actually more at the time of the Rajas and the Badshahs and the Mughals and the Rajputs and whoever? It's... well, look... All I'm saying is
The literature that we're looking at.
You will have to prove that those times were actually better. I'm not sure they were at all.
Of development of philosophies, ideas, diversities, and acceptance of different ideas. I think there were more possibilities then, because when we look at and read the stuff written back then, it's very different from what kind of dumbed down versions we read now in our books, in our literature especially, our philosophy.
Philosophy? Where?
I'm talking about early 13th century Muslim philosophy. 13th, 14th, 15th century. You know, this is what led to the Renaissance, like Riemen mentioned.
Oh, philosophy wasn't ever a strong point of Muslim civilization. It was science. Like who? Like who?
Ibn Arabi, for example.
Is that's not?
There's Ibn Arabi. There's Rumi. I mean, and Rumi wrote for the masses.
That was spiritualism. That was not philosophy.
But, no. Well, if you want to, if you distinguish between spirituality and philosophy, I mean, spirituality is a way. Even like the Tao is the way. The Muslims speak of the Sirat al-Mustaqim. That's the way.
Well, let's get on.
So in the Shia Imami Ismaili tradition, which is a sect in Islam, the golden age of Fatimid is called. 7 centuries, they had this darbar, they had that poetry, they had thinkers, they had philosophers, and even today, in Harvard School, the Islamic, the College for Islamic Studies and something, there is this, where they study the Islamic tradition, the Islamic philosophy. So yes, there was. And the other thing, even if you're convinced that after colonization we were better, I think to be a copy of someone, it is better to be yourself. Because after coloniality, we are actually produced as the West. So we were better off as ourselves that we are today not. So where we are today in lack of ontological security, because we really do not know who we are when we go to schools. Because my religion, my ideas, my beliefs, who I were back then is not talked about. So I think it is better to be ourselves than to be a copy.
I'm gonna have to try to contain myself. There's way too much to talk about in this lecture. This current strain of conversation that's following in the hall, I would say there's a difference between like what the masses have access to as opposed to what an elite, a studied elite has access to. So when we're comparing ourselves to to a time period like 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, we are looking at the output of a very slim sliver of society, whereas the mass of society did not have it. They were still in feudal times. So it's important to remember these things, that to Dr. Hoodboy's point, that it's very easy to romanticize the ways in which the past seemed better. Just like if you remember back to the 60s, you sir, we think about the 60s as having like amazing music, but in terms of the good music compared to the vast majority of the music was crap, but we just remember the good music, and the cream is what survives. We are not taking a rational, objective view of that time period. And it's important to realize that these are biases within our heart that we have to be aware of when we are trying to actually objectively observe a time period and how it compares to today or whatever. In absolute terms, it feels to me that in terms of the kind of education that an average person has access to, kind of agency an average person has, in absolute terms, even though we are in the global south or the third world, we are better off than we were. This is just my observation, I'm sorry. But what I want to speak, sir, to you, your overall talk, your lecture, it was, like you get into flow and you're in it. But I would like you to distill down the actual solution that you're offering, because that to me is not clear. If anything I've picked up from what you said, it was like you need to, the West, whatever, it needs to attend to the quote unquote soul, whatever that is. But the soul of it, the spirit or the soul of the society or whatever. But how, like, okay, is there, like, I would like you to clarify on that, and secondly, I would like to ask: is there a solution that serves like the soul better than what the opposition offers? Like, for example, the soul is very easily nourished by tribalism. The soul is very easily nourished by just feeling like you're in a group. The soul is very easily nourished by hate. So this is what I would like you to respond to, sir.
Okay, well, interesting.
This will be, there'll only be one more question after this, because it's already 8:30.
Oh, my answer will take half an hour. No. Excellent point. So just to wrap up, first of all, what you said before you phrased your question, is there really an objective way to value things of the past? I mean, where is this objectivity comes from? I don't think it's there. That's one thing. Secondly, we should also be careful. Well, there's always the past was not better. Well, but we should not romanticize the world as it is right now. That's point number 2. 3, if I talk about the soul, well, I phrase, but let's talk about our spiritual nature, right? I mean, I think we can all recognize the fact, if we are not machines, let's take that as a premise. If we are not machines, there is a thing called our spiritual nature. And the spiritual nature knows things which we cannot download or define, or ChatGPT knows everything about, because it does what love is, what truth is, what justice is, right? So the way out I see it is that the complexity, I mean, the red line through all of this is how to deal with human nature. And if we acknowledge the fact that we are a species which can be very, as you just said, right, full of revenge. This is Freud, right? Our death instinct, sex instinct, aggression instinct is all part of us. And so when Freud had to answer the question to Einstein, when Einstein wrote him, why war? Waarom Krieg? The letter of Freud then at that time, the answer to his great friend Einstein was, the only way out is culture. Is to nourish the things that can make us beings who are not full of revenge, not full of hatred, but instead of it have a sense of beauty, wants to live in truth, can do justice, have compassion, have empathy. And for these things we have an instrument. It's called the world of culture. It's the world of the art. It's the world of philosophy. It's trying to think. It's try, instead of information or being smart, try to gain some wisdom. Well, again, will it work? If I have to put this is what I think will work much better than all, quote unquote, the ideas that any form of technology or any form of science or any form of political ideology can get us out of this mess. It never worked, it will not work. And what were all the others referred to, the lady over there and the lady over there, was a reference to a past in which those sources were there, and yes, not everybody had access to it, but at least some people, but they were part of a set of ideas. And out of this set of ideas could grow an awareness of the human dignity, of freedom, of democracy. I mean, we had this kind of evolution. Now it seems to me that this evolution has been stopped, that indeed we have lost our sources, that we have to regrain them, first of all. And next to this is, if you say, well, the elites and the masses, well, the elites are more stupid in many ways than the masses. Right? But the problem, the criminality of the elites is that they don't give the masses what they should get. They poisoned our complete educational system. They brainwashed them with that ChatGPT or technology or whatever will save the world. Instead of people, at least I cannot talk about your country because there are too many things I do not know. But I know that in the West, in Europe and America, we have all the money and all the opportunities to give everybody a decent form of education. And then people can decide themselves what to do with it. Will we create angels? No, of course we will not create angels. But at least we give people an instrument to deal with life. And that's no longer true. Deal with life what a fundamentalist cannot do, what no political ideology cannot do, because people have to do it in freedom, make their own mistakes, make their own choices, deal with their own questions. But if you don't give people this kind of instrument, and now again, we can do it. But what is the trick of Trump and Elon Musk? Take it away, no science, no education, no culture, etc.
Right. The very last question now. Yeah.
Hi. In the interest of time, I feel terrible asking this. I'm right. I'm so sorry.
Okay,
Is there a question there?
we'll give her the very last.
Okay, I'm sorry. Then I don't feel bad anymore.
But there was a man there in black who has been raising his hand at least 10 times.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So make
all right. So let's take all the questions together.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
I'll just go back to the question we have right there, right? When we ask what went wrong with the West, we assume that there was something right to begin with. And when you say that Europe has sort of outsourced its defense, its production, its culture, whatnot, it's also outsourced its fascism to the rest of the world. And so why is it now a surprise in the West that there's fascism in the global minority when you've been feeding it to the rest of the world? It's not just a lack of humanism, it's also something that's coming back around. I'd like to know what you think of that, yeah.
Hello. Yeah, I'd like to build up on that. And Jung said the transformative power of continuity is far greater than the ecstasy of the new. And I feel like when we're justifying what went wrong, we're kind of alluding to the fact that there was something right in the foundational principles. And I would like to build up on my sister's fact here. In Islam, the word we have for instinct and consciousness that you talked about is fitra, which is the innate disposition that we're all born with about what's good and evil. So when the topic is what went wrong with the West, we know that the West did go wrong in those things. Why is the East also going wrong following the West?
By the way, by the East, you mean Muslims? They're also Hindus, There are more Hindus over here than...
I just gave an explanation of how our cultural conception is. It doesn't include just Muslim.
Same thing. I would have said, following on the word of romanticization, why are we romanticizing the West? And in the beginning, the framing of the conversation was that Europe achieved an intellectual pinnacle, some height, which nobody else in human history achieved. Okay, fair enough. However, Europe around at the same time, or in a take or give a couple of centuries, was involved in brutal colonialism. So how do Europeans reconcile colonialism with Reformation, with Enlightenment? Around the same time, Columbus was discovering America. So could you please comment on that? And in the wake of Gaza, we are revisiting the history, concept, idea of settler colonialism. And one thing I saw recently was very interesting, that Adolf Hitler basically was fascinated and impressed with how white Europeans committed genocide so efficiently in North America that he basically did the same thing in Europe. And white people are more offended by the Holocaust than the genocide that they committed everywhere else. So this idea, which is that Europe achieved some intellectual height, has still not reconciled with colonialism. Would you agree with that? Has not atoned for it, has not apologized for it, there's no reparations. So why do we keep being pushed this idea that World War II was the worst thing that ever happened in history, while for the people in the global south, I mean, same kinds of genocides happened over and over and again. And in fact, Africa is still recovering from it and cannot seem to get out of it. The Berlin Conference, I'm sure you know about it, literally carved up Africa. DRC cannot get out of the mess that they're in, and similarly other parts of Africa. We are grappling with the legacy of river management here that was created by colonialism. So thank you for the conversation. It was very nice, but please also comment on this. Thank you.
Okay, well, three very interesting and very good critical observations. Yes, fascism is a European phenomenon. We export it pretty successfully to the rest of the world, as we can now judge. And one of the things which always makes me smile is that the Chinese will tell us that they are not a nation, they are a civilization, but it's based on the Marxism, again, which we exported, and now they're also copying the capitalist model, which we also invented. So there are many sins. There's many sins. If my talk about what went wrong with the West was very much based on a criticism of my own society, basically European society, Western society. Okay, good. That's one thing. The second thing is that yes, genocides, colonialism, slavery, all the other things. It all comes on the account of the West. But if anybody can tell me about powers which are without sins, I'm more than happy to hear about it. Because I think it's part of human nature and all the power we had then that these things happened. But the whole idea that just to make us think of it, and you said about how did we already apologize or whatever. Well, the West is a big thing, right? It's in America and in Europe, and Europe consists of how many different countries, and there are many things going on. But for me, that's not the real issue, right? I mean, quite recently, the mayor of Amsterdam apologized for the behavior of Amsterdam during World War against the Jews. Well, maybe a good thing. There is nothing against it, but what it solves is the things which are now going on in, for example, in Gaza. There are many people now protesting at it. At the same time, we are confronted with the fact that all the focus is on Gaza, but there's nothing we say about Sudan. There's nothing we say about all the atrocities which are going on in the world, right? So it seems to me a much more productive way of the blame game. Well aware of the things which have been done and are going on, to look on what's to be done to make sure that things will not happen. And that's, for me, the center of the conversation here. Should we put all our faith on technology, on turning and the idea that we are machines? I mean, what is it, what is it that we possibly can do to make sure that things do not happen? I mean, look, the history of man, I mean, it's Walter Benjamin, right? You know, that civilization is built on barbarism. Any civilization, not only the West. Islam has its own histories of barbarism. Hinduism has its own history of the Mayas. Just we can go on and on and on and on. You know, what we now call genocide is not only a Western phenomenon. And the reason why in the West, because it happened on our territorium, consider World War II as the most. Let me my final remark. A Dutch novelist you never heard of, but in Europe he was quite famous and I knew pretty well. Harry Mulisch, his mother was Jewish, his father was an Austrian Nazi. I mean, it was a very complex history. He always said, and he once made a remark. He said, at the very moment we in Europe have forgotten about World War II, we are in the period of World War III. And I wrote my essay on the eternal fascism because I grew up with the notion never again, never again, never again, never again, never again. And in 2010, I realized it's no longer true. It's no longer true. All these things are now happening again. And interestingly enough, a whole younger generation, they never heard about Auschwitz or whatsoever. You know, for them it's 9/11 or other things. Well, okay, you can say, well, you know, it's 80 years later whatsoever, but it made true what Harry Mulisch then predicted. At the very moment we in the West forget this, we are in the second, we are approaching the Third World War, and in many ways we're already there.
I think the really important thing is that we have to challenge narratives everywhere. We here have been brought up under the notion that Muhammad bin Qasim was invited to Sindh. But you know the truth was very different. We know that Somnath was attacked not for reasons of spreading the faith, but for loot. We know what Ahmad Shah Abdali did, although he is a hero in Pakistan. So colonialism, imperialism, violence is not the monopoly of the West. It's there everywhere. And we, as we reflect upon our society, upon our history, our past, must become more cognizant of this and then take the lessons to move forward. So thank you very much, Rob.